welcome, Brett. I think the last time I saw you was in Saudi Arabia.
It was in Saudi Arabia, and it is absolutely outstanding to see you again. How are you doing?
Very good, sir. Good to be back in London. Let's put it that way. You've been all across this industry. You've seen it from both sides. You know, the areas we're looking to explore in this podcast are really the rise of scams across the industry, particularly over the last 12, 18 months, because it's become a global agenda item. Governments are talking about it. Regulators are talking about it. All the banks that I speak to on a day-to-day basis, and I'm sure they're all talking about it. Even the three-letter acronym agencies are in on this now. It's a real challenge for them as well. They're looking at this. So it's become a big topic. But the reality is this isn't new. This isn't something that's just happened suddenly and has suddenly come out of nowhere. And I think your background, where you came from, gives you a unique perspective on this challenge. Tell me about that. How did you get into this industry? Tell me that trajectory that you went through, because it's an amazing story and I think you should share it.
Now, are you talking about the good part of the industry or the bad part of the industry?
Well, I think those two things are linked, right? You started on the other side, right? So I think we need to start there.
Fair enough. I guess the way to start it out is my life of crime actually begins when I'm 10 years old. I'm from Eastern Kentucky. So Eastern Kentucky is one of these areas, extreme poverty, extreme unemployment. If you're not fortunate enough to have a job, you may be involved in some sort of scam, hustle, fraud, whatever you want to call it. And my mom used to leave me and my sister home for days at a time. My sister Denise, she was 9 years old. She walks in one day and she's got this pack of pork chops in her hand. And I'm like, where did you get that? And she was like, I stole it. And I looked at her and I'm like, show me how you did that. So she takes me over, shows me how she's boosting food. And I'm like, hey, that's the best idea ever. Let's do that. So we start stealing food. Look across the way. There's a department store, a Kmart across the way. And it becomes this perverted form of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, books, games, jewelry, music, toys, stealing everything until mom comes home, sees all the stolen loot, asks where it came from. I stand up. We found it. She's like, no, you didn't find that. My sister Denise, she stands up. She never lies at all. She stands up. We stole it. My mom looks at my sister. Show me how you did that. And she joins us. She starts running us as little shoplifters. And not only does she do that, she calls her mother to join us as well. So we become this intergenerational shoplifting ring in Eastern Kentucky. Used to take these road trips. They'd go out and steal clothes and jewelry. I'd go out and steal books because that's the guy that I am. So that's where my life of crime begins. And before anyone starts to think this, I'm not saying that my childhood resulted in my choices as an adult. What I am saying is that when you're a child, you can't help what the adults in your circle are doing. You're going to follow that. But when I became an adult, I had the opportunity, I had the decision, the choice to make as to whether to lead a life of crime or to do the right thing. And I chose that life of crime. My sister Denise had the exact same upbringing that I did. Other than that one shoplifting experience, she doesn't break the law anymore. She goes off to be a teacher, a great parent, just a good citizen overall. I'm the individual, the guy that kept on going. And as I kept going, I got more and more involved in the types of scams and hustles and frauds that not only my mother, but every single member on that side of the family was involved in. So I grew up knowing how to do insurance fraud. So faking car accidents, faking stolen cars, burning homes for cash, trafficking drugs, illegally strip mining coal, charity fraud, document fraud, forgeries. All this type of stuff I knew and had a background in until I branched off on my own and went into internet crime. Needless to say, when I first started my life as a cybercriminal, cybercrime was not a thing back then. So when I began, I was very unsophisticated. My first crime, I liked eBay a lot. I didn't really know how to make money on eBay. And I kept thinking, there's got to be some way to do this. And my inspiration came from this television show called Inside Edition. This guy named Bill O'Reilly, who later goes on to do Fox News broadcast, he used to host this 30-minute TV news show. And this one episode, which is like the start of my entire inspiration for cybercrime, they were talking about Beanie Babies. So for those who don't remember, Beanie Babies back in the mid to late 90s, yeah, they were these little stuffed animals. Mid to late 90s, they were the craze. They were the high dollar collectibles back then. The one they were profiling on that show was called Peanut, the Royal Blue Elephant, selling for $1,500 on eBay. And I'm sitting there watching the show like, I need to find me a Peanut. So I skip class the next day, go around to all the little shops looking for this little animal. Takes me about 3 hours to figure out, no, idiot, he's not in the shop. He's on eBay for $1,500. But they had these little gray Beanie Baby elephants, looked exactly the same, except they were gray, for $8. So you buy a gray Beanie Baby elephant for $8, stop by another shop on the way home, pick up a pack of blue dye, go home, try to dye the little guy. Turns out they're made out of polyester. They don't hold dye very well. You get them out of the bath, they look like they've got the mange. But here's the thing. The truth is I ripped a lady off of $1,500. I found a picture of a real one online, posted it. She thought I had the real thing. She wins the bid. At that point, social engineering kicks in. I want to put her on the defensive. I don't want to be on the defensive. So I send her a message. Hey, you win. Congratulations. Pleasure doing business with you. By the way, we've never done any business before. I don't even know if I can trust you. What I need you to do, go down to the U.S. Postal Service, pick up a couple of money orders totaling $1,500, send them to me. They're issued by the United States government. They protect you. They protect me. You send me those. I get those. I'll send you your animal. She believed that. She sends me the money orders. I cash them out, send her this creature in the mail. Immediately get a phone call. This is not what I ordered. My response, lady, you ordered a blue elephant. I sent you a blue-ish elephant. I tell that story in every presentation that I give, because that's kind of a microcosm of the way that most scams work in an online environment. You've got that potential victim that's wanting something, that desire, whether it be a product, a service, a tool, what have you. Because they want that desire allows me as that criminal, as that attacker, to come in and easily gain trust with that potential victim.
I was a student. I went to college in the late 90s as well. We're very similar ages, right? And I was an IT major. It was a very different world to the one that we live in now from a technology perspective. None of this stuff was policed. Security protocols didn't really exist. PKI encryption was not yet invented. All of those things were kind of open. So we were all as techies at that point in the industry, just trying things out and doing things. How did you sort of suddenly go, I mean, was it the eBay thing just, or was it, how did that happen from a technology point of view?
My first computer system was a Texas Instruments TI 99 4A.
Was it the cartridge one where you could put cartridges?
It was.
I had 2 games on it. One was a climbing game. Well, I don't remember. You had to climb a mountain. And the other one was Parsec.
So that was my first computer system right there. My father stood in line for hours in order to get me one of these things. And as you know, it was a glorified gaming system was all it was. My other computer systems growing up, I had the VIC-20, I had the Commodore 64, I had the TRS-80. So I grew up in that type of tech mindset, but I was more interested in just the games. I also read computer books because I was interested in knowing what makes that game. How does that operate?
How do you type the code in from the magazine and discover they've missed a whole page out of the magazine and this thing's never going to work? So how do you fill in the gap, right?
So for those who don't know, back in the day, you'd buy these magazines, and in the back of the magazine, it would have pages upon pages of code, basic, so beginner's all-purpose symbolic instruction code, basic language, and you would have to type in every single line by line, and it would take you hours to do this. And typically when you got through, you'd press run, you'd type run into the screen, and it would not work because you would have a typo in there someplace.
The people who made print magazines and did print layouts, they did not understand computer code, so they would miss out symbols. Why are they using that? I'll put this instead. And then you had to get a certain degree of capability and computer skills to be able to decipher what did they really mean, or what should this actually be. So actually, it was a great training ground because you effectively were trained to hack from the very beginning because you were given a thing that didn't work and you had to fix it. Look, I have kids who are sort of hitting that age 10, 11, right? They can just go download code from GitHub and it works. They don't have to debug it or figure out how it goes, or they can download, we'll get into this in a bit. You can just download toolkits. I'm going to sound like an old guy now. We had it harder nowadays, right?
I mean, you're right, but that also kind of leads into that trajectory of cybercrime. The evolution of cybercrime is really based on this idea of trust, because if you think about it, for cybercrime to be successful, 3 things have to take place. You have to gather data, you have to commit the crime, and then finally you have to be able to cash that crime out. All three of those necessities need to work in conjunction. If they don't, that crime fails. The problem is that one single attacker can't do all three things. They can do one thing, sometimes two, but rarely all three. And the reason for that is there tends to be two reasons. The first is a skill gap. That specific criminal simply doesn't know how to do one of those things, and that tends to fall in the gathering the data aspect. So think man-in-the-middle attacks, think phishing attacks, stealing credentials, things like that, bot networks, DDoS attacks.
It's also about access as well, and access to those systems. Look, we all have this vision of hackers being out there, and we've had this for 20 plus years, that hackers are out there and they're trying to break into your system. Look, they are and they do, but at the same time, in a lot of cases, it's a lot more simple than that. You just paid somebody on the inside to give you the password, because it's a lot easier than trying to guess or trying to brute force it through, right? So I think in a lot of cases, there's this sort of popular view, and it was always popularized in that time. I always remember the image when it was a hacker, it was a hoodie with no face, you know, and we probably saw that image for 10 years. Hackers are out to get you, right? It's like, yes, hackers are out to get you, but what about Bob that you employed last week on minimum wage, who's actually doing data entry for you, who's got all the passwords? Your real risk is, what's your employment policy? Are you doing background checks? It's how are you securing the buildings that you're in? And I remember in the first few data centers I worked in as a programmer, there wasn't really a great deal of security. Nobody checked who was coming in the building behind you. None of us changed the passwords that often. If I lifted up the keyboard on the data center, the password was on a post-it note under the keyboard, because we had so many of them. There wasn't a password vault we could use or any of those things.
I'm sure it's no different in the UK. But right now in the United States, we have a huge insider problems going on. And a lot of it has to do with, we don't have proper hiring mechanisms in place. Typically, a lot of these companies don't really check thoroughly who they're hiring. They don't know their employee. We've got know your customer, but do you know your employee? And that becomes a huge issue when you think about, for those who don't know, there's a guy named Donald Creasy who creates this thing called the fraud triangle that talks about insider fraud. And he says for insider fraud to take place, three things have to happen. You have to have pressure on that employee. That employee has to have the opportunity to commit the crime, and then that employee has to be able to justify that crime. All three things, like the necessities of crime, all three things have to take place for that crime to happen. So if you understand who your employee is, if you know your employee, you're going to understand what the pressure is that is potentially hitting that employee. And today, we've got a lot of pressure points. In the United States, we do at least. We've got fear of layoffs because people are really questioning how good the economy is right now. So you've got a lot of people that are scared of getting laid off. And certainly in the tech sector, we've seen that.
I remember 2008, 2009, when that hit, all of these problems went through the roof. And I was working in fraud prevention in e-commerce at that point. I'd never been busier. Let's put it that way. But let's wind back, because I think that the security of the systems is really important. Look, and the other thing is that you're right. There's also the know your vendor angle, right?
Right.
I think for a lot of organizations, whether they're government organizations or corporations that would, from the outside be really well run and probably have great policies and great procedures, they're, subcontracting work to a lot of other small vendors that are doing a lot of different things, and they may be subcontracting again and again. How far down that chain can you go? I mean, supply chain risk becomes a big deal as well. You might know your employee, you might know your contractors maybe, but do you know your subcontractors' contractors, right? Yeah, that's still the risk you get to, because if they've got access to the systems, it's still part of the challenge, right?
Well, I mean, it's an absolute risk. One of the stats that I throw out in presentations is that 56% of companies have experienced a breach because of third-party access. Most companies have no idea how many third parties are accessing the system. And of those third parties, they're not vetted.
Yeah, and there's also the data as well. Because in the late 90s, I was actually trying to figure out for I was working at Dell.com. And I was given the job out of our UK online store because, the internet's killing it. Dell's selling loads of computers direct. And they started to have a few losses. And I was working on the internet team, and they threw me that, Rich, go figure out why we're losing money. And I guess it was guys like you on the other side of the table that I was up against at that point, because, it was my first introduction to scams. I was suddenly seeing that, we were giving out sequential customer numbers. So if you wanted to get hold of a customer's data, it was easy because you just rang up the call center, ordered a computer, which you were never going to buy because you could just cancel the order. It cost you nothing. It took you 5 minutes to do it. Now you had a live customer number. You go to my internet site, you put a customer number in, You just plus or minus one. Now I can see all the customer data, and I've got what machine is it and where's it being delivered. All the data was there. We weren't obfuscating any of that because we didn't realize we needed to. We didn't think we had a risk. The system was wide open. So suddenly I was in a position to go, okay, how do we put controls in? How do we put passwords around this stuff? And even then it was still, what was happening was guys were turning up, they were being employed to turn up with a van to go to someone's house. They turn up with a truck and go, hey, yeah, we just delivered the wrong computer. As you say, it's about gaining trust. How did they gain trust? They wore a yellow jacket.
Right.
And they go, oh, yeah, great. And they just load them all back on the truck, and they'd load out these other boxes, which were typically full of, building rubble or old books or whatever other stuff that they wanted to put in it to make it feel heavy. By the time we got the call saying, hey, your delivery guy stole stuff off of us, it's like, that was not my delivery guy. You just gave your computer to somebody willingly because they knew you'd had one delivered. But that was the challenge. That was kind of the basic level of scam that we were up against. And you look back on that now and say that still happens, but that whole thing was like the Wild West. It was completely open because we didn't know at that time how to protect all of those things.
Honestly, you didn't even have to have a replacement box. You would just show up and say, hey, they delivered the wrong computer to you. You would know the name on the box. You would know the tracking number. You'd even know the time it was delivered. So it wasn't like you would have to wait 3 or 4 hours and hope that it had been delivered, because you've got the tracking information right there. You know when it's been delivered. So you're showing up within 30 minutes of that delivery. And you're simply knocking on the door. Hey, you've got the wrong system. It's been delivered to the wrong place. Need to pick this up. Your other one's coming tomorrow. And done. Walk out with it. And that was it.
So did you ever end up in that situation on the doorstep where they went, no, I don't think I'm giving this to you?
So that specific scam, it was much more common that you would run into that. No, I'm not giving you the box. Okay, that's fine. But if you're talking about, say credit card fraud, where you're committing card not present fraud, ordering that laptop from Apple or Sony back in the day or what have you. If you're doing that, it's arriving at someone's address with the wrong name on it, and it's much easier to get it at that point in time.
And I look back and I was telling one of the team about this the other way. I was like, look, these scams aren't new, because when I was at college, I'd see posters on intersections saying, hey, do you want to work from home? You can earn $20 an hour working from home. You kind of knew that wasn't legit, right? You knew that, but what you were going to be doing then was probably forwarding packages for a mail order scam, because it wasn't internet scams, it was mail order scams back then. But the same thing is there now. You're not going to get a poster on an intersection telling you take a piece of paper and call this landline. Now it's someone's going to message you on Instagram and say, hey, do you want to do this? But the MO to recruit people is quicker and easier and more available, but it's fundamentally the same kind of process, right? It just can happen at such a greater scale so much more quickly.
Let's put things into perspective. 2017, the largest online criminal group is called Alphabet. Law enforcement shuts it down. It ends with 240,000 members. Fast forward 2 more years to 2019. Just a dark web marketplace gets shut down called Black Market. It ends with 1.15 million members. All of that pre-pandemic. Now, during the pandemic, these numbers of fraudsters, they exploded because governments tended to institute stimulus programs with no security in place whatsoever. So it was very easy to steal money. So that gives you an idea of the trajectory of the numbers. Another thing that plays a part in this is a huge part. Not only myself, but my other criminal peers, you had to have a degree of sophistication. You had to understand the dynamics of the crime that you were committing. You had to understand the dynamics of the security that you were trying to bypass or overcome. You had to understand how to run drop addresses. You had to understand how to launder money. You had to understand every single aspect of the crimes that you were committing. So you had to have that degree of sophistication. And most criminals back then, the successful ones, they absolutely had that type of aptitude. Absolutely did. They may not have been very good coders, but they were very good criminals. These days, that is not the case. These days, the sophistication is no longer in the criminal. The sophistication is in the platform itself. Today, you can go on typically Telegram. You can go on Telegram, you can buy a tutorial for as low as $5 US, $10 US. You can, if you're not comfortable with a tutorial that teaches you how to commit that one specific type of crime, that's okay. You can take live instruction classes. These classes range anywhere from $300 up to $3,000. And you get a live instruction class. A master fraudster takes you by the hand and will walk you through how to commit one specific type of fraud. And it comes with a guarantee. If you don't make money by the time this program is over, I will refund you your tuition. And they mean that. But if you don't even have to pay money, you can simply sit in the channel and ask questions, read the threads, and you will learn how to properly commit these crimes. So a beginning cybercriminal, to profit, they don't need to know anything. They don't need to understand any dynamic of the crime that they're committing. Typically, everything is off-the-shelf products, tools, and services that are done for you.
You posted something, last week on LinkedIn, which I picked up on, and it resonated for me because you were looking at, these kind of websites where you can literally, or Instagram pages, you would literally see that people are selling, counterfeit or access to subscriptions and that kind of stuff. And you think, well, look, back in the day, we all had a Napster account. So kind of, there's always been that thing, right? But you're looking at this going, look, it's not on its own. It's not a Napster account, right? This is a gateway into a world that has all this other stuff right next to it. You're walking into a store effectively that can say, look, on the one hand here, you can get access to, films that you want to watch, maybe for less money without a subscription, or you can download that game. I know we both like our computer games. It's one of those things where, do you want to pay $75 for this game that's just come out, or do you want to get a whole bunch of them for like $20?
Right.
There are kids who are going to be easily tempted to do that, who otherwise aren't necessarily criminals. It's just expensive being a kid and having access to this stuff and trying to keep up with the other kids who've maybe got more money than you. There's going to be temptation to do that. But then if you get into that environment and it's easy to find it because it's only a Google search link away, all that other stuff and all of that other temptation's right next to you, because suddenly do you want to go and buy cards, or because all that stuff's there to buy at the same time. You can just click through the next set of pages and suddenly you can be onto some pretty scary stuff quite fast.
A lot of the criminals that are out there, it is this gateway, whether it be piracy, you're downloading from the torrents. It may be bots. You're trying to get that PlayStation 5. And so you're using bots to ping the stores to see if it's in stock. So it begins at that point.
And this is one for us as parents as well. It's one of those things where drawing the line on that stuff is really important, because it's one of those things, as you say, it's so close now to all this other activity. It's look, and as you say, it can be gray area stuff. Look, do you want to get a ticket for that concert? Well, how are you going to go and queue up everyone else with one phone, or are you going to know that half the other people trying to do this have got 10 different bots waiting on the line to try and get that call to pick up so they get those concert tickets? If everybody else is doing it, it's not technically illegal. But then if you're doing it, as you say, then what's the step from that to use that to go to the next thing to the next thing? It's there's too many easy steps in this, whereas like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you had to be much more deliberate about it.
It's really a natural progression. If you think about it, little Billy or, the child is at home and they're wanting to watch the movie that maybe mom and dad won't take them to, or they can't afford to see in the theater. So they download a copy of it. And so the theft begins right there. I'm not hurting anyone. The parent finds out, or maybe doesn't find out, but say the parent finds out. What does the parent say? It's okay. And I don't want you watching that R-rated movie. You're going to get in trouble for that. But the parent never addresses the theft that goes on, that criminal aspect that goes on. And once that happens, it's kind of this permission all of a sudden. So you're okay with that. The child goes from that level to the next level. So all of a sudden the child is looking for that $70 video game. It's so, I pirated the movie before. It was okay to do that. Is it okay to buy access to the account? I mean, I'm not stealing anything. That's what they tell themselves. So they then start with that. So now you're doing an account takeover. That's exactly what that is. So you're used to account takeover. Or maybe you're wanting to see Taylor Swift in concert and you're not wanting to pay $4,000, and you realize that, hey, everyone that's getting tickets is using bot networks to make sure they get access to these things. So now you're learning how to use a bot network to deprive inventory of other legitimate users. So you're coming into it, and that opens up that gate. So all of a sudden, what does it typically go to from there? It goes into refund fraud is where it goes. So now you don't have the money to buy the PlayStation 5, but you've got $500. but you can't really afford that. So what I can do is I can order the PlayStation 5 and then claim it didn't show up or it wasn't in the box, or I can fake returning it and I get to keep the product, and not only that, get my money back. So I start doing that. And that type of trajectory, believe it or not, that's 100% the way a lot of these new criminals are entering this environment.
If I remember correctly, you were giving kind of customer ratings on what you were doing for people. But look, I remember that when I was working in the credit card space, and I was looking at this and reading the customer service comments on these websites about, great cards, 9 out of 10, 75%
Right.
effectiveness, etc. And, I was kind of gobsmacked that this was like, seriously, they're giving each other customer ratings. And, one of my bosses turned around and said, well, why wouldn't they? It's about customer service here and it's about trust. And you're like, as you say, it's still about trust. It's an economic web. It's a trading web. It's got to work, and it only works because there's got to be trust in the system.
Some of these forums have tens of thousands. Some of them have a couple 100,000 members on there, marketplaces, what have you. You get those members that are constantly sharing and exchanging information, not only in reviews, but in real-time updates of the targets that they're hitting, the vendors that they're buying from, the new services that are coming out, the new security services that are coming out. So you get this constant real-time sharing and exchanging of information, and it becomes very difficult to defeat that at the end of the day.
So let's flip around on the other side, Brett, and talk about the victims. And then, because I think there's a really interesting piece that links back to social engineering here, because the people that become victims that then become kind of almost repeat victims and then effectively become part of the cash out process and the mule, because I'm sure that you have plenty of experience on that. So a lot of this always gets put on, it's perceived as a seniors problem, that the people who are going to be social engineers are old. And I think that's actually unfair. It does happen, absolutely. But I think my experience in the industry is it's not about age. It's about financial services experience and your savvy and your knowledge about how financial services work, how banking works, how security works. And I think that there is an older demographic that's less comfortable with IT and computers and those things that still exist. But there's also a naivety, and I saw it as a student on campus. Some of my friends fell for scams and frauds. They were mail order scams at the time, but they would mail checks to people for things that they were never going to get, right? And it was a naivety or a trustingness that younger people will have, because they haven't actually got through that process of figuring out that the world's a more complicated and scary place sometimes than they've been led to believe. And you must have seen that in terms of the, both in the work that you do now and in your previous experience, that must be a thing that's happening. Do you see that as just a bigger problem as for the older generation?
Before we go into that, let me just say this. It's important to understand that the victim of a crime is never to blame for the crime which is perpetrated upon them. I don't really care what that victim has done or hasn't done. The only person that's responsible for crime is the criminal. And on the criminal's part, it takes an active decision every step of the way for that criminal to act. That criminal has chosen to victimize a person or an organization. So it's always the criminal's choice. It's also important to understand that we as a society, not only as a society, but media, a lot of companies that are out there as well, we tend to blame the victim for those crimes which are perpetrated upon them, especially when we're talking about internet crime. We typically say things like, why would you click on that link? Why would you send money to someone you don't even know? Who would even believe gift cards? So we tend to blame the victim. And when we do that, that oftentimes results in that victim not reporting the crimes that they've been victims of.
And that's so important, Brett, to say that. I think it's for two reasons. One is, look, no one should ever be ashamed of this. Look, I've had family members who've fallen victim to romance scams. It's one of those things where, and they look back and they blame themselves for this. And I've said to them on a very personal level, it's like, look, you are not to blame for this. They're a professional. They are really, really good at this. They've made a significant amount of money and spent years and years training to do this. You had no idea this was happening to you. Why do you blame yourself for this? But people do. And as you say, part of it is the media, because it sets that up and it's easy to, to judge. And I think, but the reality is, it's very difficult. And as victims, particularly, social engineering is pernicious because it puts people in a position where they do things that they wouldn't normally do as well, because you're pushing the buttons as a social engineer to get people into a heightened state of emotion. You're pushing them under
Right.
fear or pressure, either of being, maybe they're worried about their bank account being compromised because you've told them that their bank account's been taken over, or you're putting them in a situation where they're really afraid that they're not going to get the loan that they should get, all those things, because they're not going to be able to make the down payment, or they're not going to be able to make payroll at the company, or whatever it is. It's really important that the victims understand that, because we need, as an industry, to get those reports, because if we don't know that crime has occurred, it's hard to prevent what's going to happen in future. Now, that there are techniques you can use to guard against, standard approaches and standard MOs, but having victims in a position to be able to feel comfortable always to come forward and report this is critical. I think, look, we're starting to see with scams now regulation around the world that's starting to put more pressure on organizations and banks in particular to own this problem, but it's going to take time. And I think in the meantime, making sure that victims feel comfortable to come forward and talk about this is really important for us as an industry, because we need the data more than anything else.
No, I agree. And just to so that people understand just how insidious this thing can become. That potential, that victim, they've got a safety net. They've got a support group of friends, family members, associates. They've got that. But when they feel embarrassed or scared of being shamed that they are a victim, what happens at that point? They tend not to talk about it to that support group that they've got, those friends, family members, and associates. So they close them off. So they no longer have that ability to have that objective outside viewpoint coming in and talking to them about the scam that they're typically undergoing at that point in time. You mentioned romance scams. That's exactly how that works.
And the scammers normally, probably, I mean, from my experience, the scammers actively telling that victim not to talk to someone else. Don't go and discuss with this with your friends and family. You can't tell your employer about this, or whatever the talk track's going to be.
Right. We have to get to the point where we're understanding that crime is the fault of the criminal, not the victim. And we have to get to the point where we're not judging the victim. A lot of people tend to think, well, it would never happen to me. I will tell you the truth. Those are the types of individuals that when I was a criminal, that's who I wanted to talk to. If someone thought they couldn't be scammed, that just means they've got a blind side that I can walk right in and get them to give me what I want them to give me.
They're looking for certain types of mark, right? They're looking for certain types of individual who they think they're going to have a higher level of success with, and that will correlate to certain profiles potentially. And a lack of experience in the financial space is ideal, because then you haven't got as many things to measure it against, or you haven't been through the process as many times. But then the other side is, as you say, it comes back to the pressure and the fear that you can exert as a scammer on an individual, and often people who are earlier in their financial lives can potentially be quite at risk as well, because they don't have as much money typically, because they haven't got a career under their belt. Maybe they're at school, they're studying, they've got significant financial pressure. They might be running, a job in parallel to studying, or those kind of things. So I think, and also they're highly accessible, that younger generation right now, because they're on just about every messaging app known to humankind, including Telegram. It's very easy as a criminal to automate to reach those people.
Senior citizens, that older demographic, a lot of people tend to think that that is the number one victimized demographic. And actually, it's not. It's the number two victimized demographic. The number one victimized demographic are millennials. Millennials, who you would think would understand, have that experience, that knowledge of not only tech, but the financial service industry. And a lot of them do. So why would millennials tend to be the number one victimized demographic? I would argue that it's the apathy that takes place. You figure that these individuals, they grew up with the tech. Not only did they grow up with the tech, but they also grew up with the media telling them, hey, it's hackers. It's these computer geniuses that are wearing the hoodies, that they're in the, they've got the Matrix background flowing in the back. They're operating in the shadows. They're ghosts in the system that you're never going to be able to catch. So they've not only heard that, but they've also heard about a breach every single day. So they've become anesthetized to it.
I think that's a really interesting point, Brett. I'd never thought of it that way. You actually make a good point, because I'd always looked at it as more a kind of an inexperienced thing or a desperation thing, because it's like, how am I going to make rent? How am I going to do that? Hey, this person's offering me something. Hey, if something's too good to be true, it usually is. But sometimes we're all in that position where we just want it to be true, right? And we're prepared to sort of suspend disbelief.
If you've adopted that almost philosophy of fatalism, that whatever is going to happen is going to happen, then why would you worry about proper security? Well, and you hear it from a lot of millennials. Well, yeah, I've probably been hacked, probably will be hacked. My account's been taken over, probably taken over again. And you hear this type of apathy that's coming out, and it's simply because they grew up being told. There's nothing that you can do about that. They're computer geniuses. How could you ever hope to combat these people? And the truth of the matter is that most attackers, yeah, you've got some sophisticated attackers, but they're 2 to 3% of the overall attack system that's out there. Those 97% of cybercriminals that are out there, they're using off-the-shelf products, tools, and services. They're sharing and exchanging information. They're networking with other criminals, and they work together to victimize you or your company. If you can understand that, if you can just dispel that whole system of hackers that are out there and understand that, no, most of them are just very good social engineers.
We always get hung up on the technology, but actually underneath all of these things fundamentally is the social engineering, because and it doesn't have to be done live on a phone call. It can still be done via WhatsApp or Instagram or Telegram or what have you, because you can still manage that but the social engineering has to happen, because it's not purely a mechanical thing.
Take the crypto vertical, for example. All right. It's the blockchain. I'll grant you that blockchain's outstanding. Am I going to do a 51% attack? No, I'm not, because it's going to cost a lot of money to do that. But guess what I can do? I can get someone's Twitter credentials, sign in as them, and start diverting whatever. I can tell somebody, hey, I'm offering free Bitcoins to the first 1,000 people that respond with a wallet address, or I can do an airdrop of tokens, and that airdrop just allows me to steal whatever existing tokens are in their virtual wallet all of a sudden, which is a very common technique as well. So I've got all these different types of, while the main system itself, that blockchain, is pretty damn good, all the outlying systems, those social systems, they're not.
But also what I'm noticing, and I'm really interested in your opinion on this, is there's a small group of those people who are scammed who come back for more, if you see what I mean, because they've been socially engineered so well by the scammers that they become almost part of the whole scammers process. And in a lot of cases, that then leads to them being part of the whole cash out process. A little bit like those posters on the intersection, take this number, do you want to work from home? Those jobs were invariably, can you do mail forwarding? And that was effectively taking part of that cash out process. Take the stolen goods, forward it onto another address where it would then be sold and turned into cash, right? Now, the modern digital equivalent of that is the people that the cyber criminals end up recruiting. And in some cases, they're actually victims who've been socially engineered so well, they become part of that cash out process. I mean, how have you seen that? And, because what I'm interested in is the scale of that and the challenge of that as a problem, and then how that leads to the cash out process and the mules themselves.
So those types of money mules, you've got the money mules that are 100% complicit. They know what they're doing and they're okay with that. You've got the money mules that are not 100% complicit, but they kind of sort of have an idea of what's going on, and they're still okay with it. And then you've got the money mules that they don't have a clue what's going on, and they're just gullible, just for lack of a better word. All right. And depending on the type of crime that you're committing will often determine the type of mule that you're using. So, for example, during the pandemic, in the United States, we had a lot of stimulus programs. We had EIDL, we had PPP, we had unemployment insurance that was supplemented by the federal government. A lot of the fraudsters that were committing these crimes. I mentioned before that you've got those three necessities of cybercrime, gathering data, committing crime, cashing out. Well, the data, that personal information, everyone's personal information is available. So it's not hard to get that data. Committing the crime for stimulus programs was not complicated at all because for 6 months in the United States, there was no security in place whatsoever. In fact, there was a thing called the CARES Act that took away some of the existing security that was in place. So those two aspects, the gathering the data and the commission of the crime, those were very easy. But if you're in Russia, the Ukraine, the EU, someplace down in South America, and you're committing United States stimulus fraud, say unemployment fraud, because that's where a lot of money was lost. So you're filing unemployment claims for the state of California. Well, yeah, the claims will go through. But when you go to withdraw those funds from an ATM in Brazil, are you going to get all the money out of the account? No, you're not. It's going to raise some flags because you're supposed to be in the United States. So that's going to get shut down fairly quickly. So you had to rely on money mules stateside to withdraw that money for you. And for that type of fraud, those money mules were complicit, 100% complicit. And you're
going out and recruiting those people. You can keep 10% of whatever you withdraw, or however,
or 30% or 40%, whatever that was. All right, it's typically 30 to 40% is what you'll give. So you, the person who's gathering the data and committing the actual crime, you'll keep 50 to 60, maybe 70% of the funds. The other percentage goes to that network of money mules that are out there running the cards, withdrawing the money and sending you your cut of it on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. For stimulus fraud, that's the way that works. For say you're running romance schemes. So, you've found that potential victim on one of these dating sites. Those types of money mules tend to be completely unaware of the crime that they're being part of being that money mule. So, that scammer will tell them, hey, can you accept this deposit for me and send me my cut? I'll let you keep $400 or $500 of the check, and then you can, for your trouble. All right. So they tend to not be aware of what's going on. And then you've got that gray area of money mules that are out there that, they kind of sort of know what's going on, but the scammer at the same time is giving them just enough justification, just enough of a reason that they can justify that crime themselves by saying that, hey, he said it was legal, he said it was okay, or, who am I hurting? But at the end of the day, it's one of these necessities of cybercrime. If you can't put cash in pocket, figuring that most attacks that are out there are looking to profit, are looking to cash out. If you can't cash out properly, why even commit the crime in the first place? So it becomes that becomes that funnel at the end of the day. So it's really important for fintechs, for crypto exchanges, for traditional financial institutions. It becomes extremely important to know the laundering mechanisms and the people who are doing the money mules that are out there in order to combat this type of crime, because that is your last line of defense.
You go back 5 or 7 years, you'd see money move in $5, $10, $15, $20,000 lumps. Now you'll see hundreds of $20 payments.
Right.
Smurfing as some people call it. But it's, I was talking with a regulator in a country in the Far East. They were seeing bank accounts opened in the morning, money flushed through it in $20 increments, and the account being closed in the evening the same day, because they knew it would make it harder to investigate because the account's closed, right? So now if you go to check the account, it's a dead account, right? But that's only possible because scripting and automation and computer tools, and these are tools that you can now go and download. You combine that with the vast availability of PII data that you can use to set up accounts in the first place. The cost of opening an account before was kind of high because you need to have IDs, you need to have, addresses, you need to have, proper identities that you can use. And they used to cost a lot of money. They're pretty available and quite cheap now. So now you can start to do this at a scale and do it with far smaller amounts of cash in a far more effective way. And if you can script that and automate that, then it makes money laundering a very different game. Now, you still need the physical humans on the other end, because if you want to turn that into physical banknotes to break the digital chain, someone's still got to walk into a bank, or more likely walk up to an ATM and withdraw that in $200 increments. But there was a report came out last year from a lot of the influential banks. They were saying, look, banks need to move to event-based compliance away from calendar-based compliance, because typically compliance was, we'll check this once a week, once a month, once a quarter, once a year. Now you need to check when the money moves, or when a certain amount of money moves, not, well, we checked them last month and we'll check them next month. It's too late next month. The account's gone, right? We're getting close to the generative AI piece and the ChatGPT side of things. And look, I mean, it will be used. It is being used on the criminal side. I mean, you can use it to parse the data, because look, anyone who's doing that data collation on the criminal side right now, if they're not using AI, I'll be very surprised. That's going to allow you to have a better constructed botnet. It's going to allow you to have a more believable set of identities and all those things. It's being used to do those things. I've sat and watched those videos on the internet of scammers working out of call centers in different places around the world, where they're constantly picking up and making the call and saying, hi, I'm from the computer repair company, you've got a virus, etc., etc. Can I log into your computer? 95% of the calls they make, people say, no, go screw yourself, you're not touching my computer, go away. There's only 5% of those calls go through. So 95% of their calls are wasted. Now, probably not 95% of their time, because when they get one, they're spending a lot of time on the phone. But let's say 50% of their time, they're non-productive. Suddenly, if you're doing that through a chatbot mechanism, and you can have 500 agents running, you can be scamming a human 95% of your time, because the automation's taking care of the people who say no thank you.
Exactly.
And so as a criminal, you're going to be able to recruit more people to do the job, because I guess right now it's probably hard to recruit people to sit there and be sworn at all day.
So you do it at the call center level, you do it at the pig butchering crypto level, you do it at the romance scheme level. So you take care of that initial lift, that initial layering of trust, of this, just getting the door open to where you actually hand it off to that human attacker.
I mean, that's what you'd call in a normal corporate environment, if you were selling a product, it's lead generation. How do I generate good leads to go spend my time on?
That's exactly what that is.
It's not that people have become, more susceptible to this. I think if anything, the general population is better educated and better equipped to avoid this than ever before. But the groups of people who are potentially going to be victimized are under far more assault on a day-to-day basis. I don't have a landline at home anymore. I don't think many of us do. But I had a landline up until about 2 years ago, just because I got it when we moved into the house like 10 years ago. And pretty much by 2021, by the time pandemic happened, it was like I just cut it off, because the only calls I got were scam calls. The only people who called my landline were scammers. That's the worrying thing for me. I think it's those people who are susceptible to this, or do want this to be true, or are more desperate in society in particular, who are the most vulnerable for whatever reason, are going to be increasingly under more and more attack. And that's part of what do we do as an industry to solve for that?
Think of it like this too, though, and you're right. I mean, you've got that demographic that is absolutely very susceptible to the current tools that are being used. All right, but as these tools become better at their job of lead generation for criminals, as you put it, that demographic becomes much larger all of a sudden. Think, for example, deep fakes. All right. So if I am able to fabricate a deep fake of a company's CEO that gets on a video call with the payroll department and tells them to divert payment from an existing account that we've been depositing into a new account, that demographic has all of a sudden changed.
It's opening up a new channel, basically, which is, before they're not going to fall for the badly worded email. When did you last see a badly worded or badly spelled scam email? I haven't seen one for ages. I used to see them all the time. They used to flood my inbox. It would have capitals. It would have poor English. It would look bad. You don't see those anymore. Google's got a lot better at filtering it out as well. So it didn't become a good channel. But as you say, move towards that video channel. Give people a video call that looks, realistic. You run it with AI on the back end. You don't have to have a pre-recorded deep fake. You can have effectively a live generated deep fake that's going to interact and be relatively convincing for quite a few people. You can do it with audio. I've seen it personally with WhatsApp. A friend of mine at a company had the text from their CFO, saying, hey, I need you to make an urgent payment. the thing that gave it away was the CFO used emojis. That was one of the things that made them go, oh, hang on a minute, this doesn't make sense. And they're a sophisticated person who's worked in financial services for 15 years. So I think this is a really good point you make, right? Is the bar for this is going to be continuously raised, and like you said, the kind of people who go, oh, I'll never fall for that, suddenly they're not expecting to fall for that because they expect a scam to look a certain way. They go, I know what that looks like. I know it's going to be it's going to be a would you like to make $20 million out of crypto message, which, okay, a lot of us can go, okay, we've heard of that one.
As these tools get better, we're going to be approaching the moment where where human beings are no longer able to know what is factual and what is not. And that's a very scary aspect to think about.
I was thinking about something the other. I was talking to someone else in the office the other day about this, and it was, when was the last time you saw a picture that you could say, oh, that's photoshopped? If you can deliver that level of quality and that level of believability in purely computer generated graphics, as you say, link that with AI, anything's possible. At that point, you're going to need technology to tell you what's real and what isn't, because we're not going to be able to tell. And as we know in tech circles, as soon as you're relying on tech to tell you whether the other tech is real or not, there's always a vulnerability there. There's no guarantees either. We can link it back to where we were earlier, Brett. It was kind of obvious when I was at college, if you were going to get involved in stuff, the warning signs were very straightforward. It was like, if you're going to take that telephone number off that poster that says, would you like to make $25 an hour working from home, no skills necessary, the answer was, this is too good to be true, so it probably is. So it's going to involve some level of criminality, or at least turning a blind eye to whatever criminality is going on. One that's increasingly common now is the student or the young person being told, oh, look, we just need access to your account.
Right.
We'll give you a little bit of money for it, but, we just need access to your account for a few months. Just give us the account details and we'll pay you in cash, or whatever it's going to be. How else are people getting pulled into those things? What should somebody, a young person, 18, 19, going to college, going out into their first job, what should they be worried about? What signals should they be looking for?
The commonality of all those attackers, there's really only 4 things that they're looking for. They're looking for information. What can I get you to tell me? Can I get your PII? Can I get your social security number, your date of birth? Can I get you to give me information about your company that you're working for? So I'm looking for information. I'm looking for access. All right. Can I get you to plug in a thumb drive into your system? Can I get you to give me remote access to your system? Can I get you to give me access to your bank account or your not Telegram, but Twitter account or what have you? So information, access, data. Do you have data that I can breach into the company, steal, resell the data on the black market? Do you have data that I can lock down with ransomware that you have to have in order to operate? And then finally, cash. So attackers are only looking for 4 things: information, access, data, cash, or a combination of those things. So that should be the first flag that comes up. What is this person looking for? Is it an unsolicited request for these things? And typically a lot of these scams are long-term scams. It's not an attacker that immediately contacts you and says, hey, I need you to log in, or I need you to give me remote access to your machine. There typically is some sort of pretext that comes before that. So it's the tech support. You've been infected and I need you to give me remote access to your machine. So any type of unsolicited request for information, access, data, or cash should raise that flag. Also, you need to look at, is this something that you're desiring? Is it creating a problem that's causing an emotional response and not a rational or logical response? Is this scenario causing you to not be objective, but instead a knee-jerk type of reaction, that emotional response? That should be another flag that pops up there. You've got another thing is the attacker, is this call or this solicitation, is it such that they don't want me to disengage from the environment. They don't want me to hang up the call. If it is, that should be another flag, because you should be able to hang up and call them back. And typically you're not going to be able to do that. So these are the types of flags that you're looking for. So you need to be able to take a pause, take a breath, and consider what's going on. You need to be able to, and this is why we spoke about victims earlier, you need to be able to have that friend, family member, associate, even enemy that you can contact and say, hey, does this sound reasonable to you? And at that point, since they're not engaged in it in the moment, they're able to say, no, that's absolutely a scam.
We had a campaign here in the UK for a while, and I think it's still active, called Take 5. And it was exactly that. Across all the banks, just saying, look, if something doesn't feel right, just take 5 minutes, get off the phone, get off away from your computer, go have a cup of tea, because we're British, and think about it. Look, it has a massive impact. You're so right. It's people get to step away when you're having your emotional buttons pushed, whether it's about politics or money or bills or debt or fear of losing your home or whatever it is that the scammer is trying to put you, fear of somebody taking over your computer even, or that your iPhone's been infected or whatever it is. People who are able to step back and just get that little bit of breathing space, and even better, as you said, contact somebody else and run the idea by someone else, those people overwhelmingly are much less likely to end up engaging in the scam itself. The scammer who's just put 60 minutes into speaking to you does not want you to get off the phone. They need you to complete the task that they are giving you, because they've got a sunk cost at that point in terms of their time.
We as human beings, we don't like to upset people, especially if you're British.
Very rude.
But you've got to understand that it's okay, excuse my language, but it's okay to be an every now and then. All right? It's okay to say no. So here's a scenario, and this is actually a real life scenario. This happens every single day. So I can go on one of these dark web marketplaces. I can buy some of your financial information. So for say $40, I can get your bank account credential logins. I can get your browser fingerprint. I can get your name, address, and I can get some of the financial information that's in your account. So some of the transactions that you've actually got on your bank account. All right. What I do at that point is I send you a text message to your mobile phone. And that text message says, hey, we've approved the wire transmission that you requested for $2,000. If you did not request this, press N. Well, you didn't request it, so you're going to press N. As soon as you press that and send it across the line, you get a spoofed phone call that looks like it comes from your financial institution, but it's not. It's me. So I get on the line. I've got some of your banking information. I tell you that I'm customer service with the bank, and I start quoting back some of the financial transactions that you've done. What does that do? That creates that level of trust. That convinces you that I am your financial institution. Who else would know that? From that point, what do? I start to social engineer you. I say, so you didn't request this transfer? Well, no, I didn't request it. Well, let's log in and let's make sure everything's okay with your account. So then I act like I'm logging in. And I'm like, so you're not in South America right now? Well, no, I'm not in South. Well, someone's in South America that's logged into your account. What we need to do, since that's not you, we need to make sure that you're safe and secure, that your money is okay. What we're going to do is we're going to transfer your money right now into a temporary secure account where everything is protected. And at that point, you lose every single bit of money that you've got. Now, that is exactly a lot of the attack scenarios that's happening in the United States right now.
So, Brett, I think another thing that we should talk about here, when I speak to a lot of the banks, they generally feel that more pressure should be put on the social media companies to vet what they're doing or to manage what they're doing. Now, being British or American, free speech is something that we all hold very close to our hearts, and we want to maintain that. But at the same time, do these companies have more responsibility?
I absolutely think that social media, they are not being as responsible as they should, or as protective as they should. You take Twitter, for example. I'm aware that Twitter at one point had 40% of the conversations, an estimate 40% of the conversations were bot-driven conversations that were going on Twitter. All right, that's a huge number when you think about it. That's a huge number. And it's not because Twitter can't reel in the bot problem. They can. They're just choosing not to. The user numbers, whether fake or not, matter. It's profit driven. That's the only thing that it is. The company wants that aura of having the billion users online. Doesn't matter if 40, 50, 60% of them are not real users. They still have a billion users, and they advertise that, and it helps out. It helps with VC funds, everything else.
Look where Twitter is now with the work that's happened there. Regardless of whether you agree with the process or the ethos behind it, the reality is that the financial impact in terms of the reduction in the number of accounts and other things is very obvious, like you say, right?
Right. When I was in prison, I went through this thing called cognitive behavioral therapy, teaching you that your thoughts determine your feelings determine your actions. So if you can change the thought process, your actions change at the end of the line. One of the things that they also taught us were these ideas of thinking errors. That should is a thinking error. You know, we can sit back and we can say these social media platforms should start to verify their users better. The fact of the matter is that they're not. And as such, we can only accept what they're not doing right now, and we have to act accordingly with that. So at the end of the line, if it results in money laundering at financial institutions, crypto, fintech, what have you, they have to accept that in that line of social media, they're not doing the job that they should be doing. We have to accept that, and we have to act accordingly with that. We can't depend on them to do the right thing. We have to do what we need to do to protect our users.
They're not legally responsible for this, so they're going to play
Right.
to the letter of the law. So either you change the liabilities for them in this and make them somewhat culpable for, okay, if the scam's originating from there, you're going to bear some of the financial burden. They wouldn't even need to bear that much of it, honestly.
Right.
It would change the economics and really, change their approach. I think the other one is what I genuinely see when I talk to those companies, and it's fairly infrequent to be fair, is there's not really much understanding of how this stuff works. There's not a lot of education in there in terms of how these things go on, because again, that's an economic issue because they're not economically motivated to look at it. So therefore they don't hire people with the knowledge. They don't go and seek the knowledge because there's no financial drive for them to do so. Also, this is almost, you could argue, and maybe this is too much of an argument, but this is almost critical infrastructure, right? That we come to rely on these companies for everyday communication in a lot of cases. How many of us rely on those messaging services to do a lot of what we do, whether it's personal or commercial, right?
Absolutely.
So therefore, is it a big stretch to argue that this infrastructure needs to be better protected? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to scan or look at the contents of messages or any of those things. I don't think that's a solution. But what I do think, and certain governments have tried to do that with some of these companies, and the reality is encryption is encryption, and I think governments often don't understand encryption and what it means. And if you want to encrypt for the right reasons, you can't have exceptions for the wrong reasons. It's very difficult. Now, if you happen to be the right agencies with the right level of technology and capability, then I'm sure there are ways and means. There always are. But the reality is for a commercial organization, something's either encrypted or it isn't. You don't get to make exceptions. So, but I think the reality is you do have control of the front door. And you may not be able to control what's going on in the middle inside the messages, but you can control the front door. And I think they could control the front door a lot more effectively. Now, the reality is also that if you look at something like Telegram, then, the chances of us in the West regulating that is somewhat limited.
Now, here's the thing. You say that, but I don't believe that. I really don't. So Telegram is available on Android. It's available on Apple. The problem with Telegram is the Russian who owns that, at least in the United States, he does not respond to any law enforcement or subpoena request at all. Now, there's something wrong with that, and what we should do is it should be removed from the app stores that are on Apple and on Android. If you're not able to respond to law enforcement requests, you're not able to be on the app stores.
And that's a great point, Brett, because the point there is you're not restricting free speech by doing that, because you're not making it illegal. You can still access it if you want to download it onto a laptop, then I guess you can, right? But the reality is if you remove it from mainstream distribution channels like the app stores, then it makes it far harder for individuals to kind of, you raise the technical bar for people to be able to go and
Right.
access that and use it.
With Telegram especially, you've got Telegram is now the Wild West of cybercrime. It used to be you had these attackers that would go on the traditional dark web. They would go typically on Dread, which is the Reddit of the dark web, and they would talk their cybercrime and the attack vectors and things like that. That's not the case anymore because the traditional dark web has a lot of friction involved.
It's hard,
So
right?
now
Onion browsers, Tor nodes, all of that kind of stuff. If you want to use those things, then your ability to operate in the regular civilian world is certainly curtailed because everyone's looking at this going, that looks like a Tor node. I don't want you here. Telegram's just on your phone and it's an app and it just kind of works, right?
And it's got a keyword search function, which the dark web doesn't have that. So it's very friction free all of a sudden.
The other thing is these things are hiding in plain sight on Instagram and Facebook. As you say, Facebook's not great at taking this stuff down. If you want to go and recruit money mules, or if you're somebody who wants to go and buy stolen cards, they're just not called stolen cards. They've just got slang for it. And Instagram isn't going to keep up with whatever the current slang for that is going to be. So, if you're looking for stacks or decks or whatever it's going to be called, you just go and find those things on Instagram. You don't Google stolen cards, where can I buy them? And then look, again, maintaining the account as you go through, you don't need to look at the content of the messages if they're encrypted or whatever. That's the hard problem. The easy problem is, what's the frequency of use? Where are the domains being accessed from and all of those things? How many different phones are you using to access this or account or vice versa? Again, those things, that metadata is very manageable. These companies have access to that. They can do something about that. And it always gets pushed back to a privacy thing. And actually, I think that's a look over here kind of game that they're playing. Is, look over here, privacy, very important, privacy, First Amendment, or free speech, can't be tinkering with that. And the answer is, not asking you to touch any of that. I just want you to manage your platform in a more reasonable way. It's ironic that's actually some of the things that goes on in social engineering. So let's change the subject. No. So Brett, let's go back. No, the other thing is education, right? So we've looked at this. You've got that Instagram demographic, the younger people, they're being recruited. They're part of this whole process. Maybe they're being scammed. Maybe they're being turned into mules.
Right.
How do we get through to them? Because look, if I go back to my childhood and I look at the campaigns that were kind of fired at me to stop me, drinking, smoking, or anything else, it was hard taking in that public service information. Those messages were basic, they were simple, and even then a lot of us, let's be honest, didn't take much notice of them.
Right.
How do you do that to an Instagram generation who are potentially just bombarded by messages on a day-to-day basis and becoming somewhat apathetic to it? I mean, how do we cut through? How do we make a difference?
I honestly believe, and I really honestly believe this, that if you are simply truthful with someone, you don't try to embellish, you don't come out with a bunch of hyperbole, you just simply say the truth of the matter. I think that makes a world of difference. We don't need to paint computer attacks or computer crimes as done by hackers, as done by people that we'll never catch. Just be honest. Hey, a lot of the time it's stuff that we know about. It's stuff we've been told about that we're not doing anything about. And since these attacks are not highly sophisticated, guess what? It's not highly complicated or sophisticated to protect yourself from these attacks. 80% of every single person on the planet uses the same or similar passwords across multiple login environments. If you're able to freeze credit in your specific country, freeze your credit of every single person in the house. Monitor your accounts. Those three things are major things that most of the population worldwide, they don't do. So if you just simply do those three things, it puts you higher up in that tree than the lowest hanging fruit that's out there, because most attacks are lowest hanging fruit. So how do you educate someone on that? I think you do it by simply being plain spoken, being truthful, not embellishing, not having hyperbole, but also understanding that it needs to be something that is seen. A lot of these platforms, a lot of financial institutions, a lot of retail merchants, yeah, they'll have the warnings out there, but they're warnings that are kind of hidden because they don't want to cause that customer to distrust the overall environment. We also see that education needs to be persistent. Education tends to be very good and very effective while that education is happening. But once that education goes away, for example, phishing simulation campaigns, while it's ongoing, phishing attacks, the success drops significantly. Once those campaigns are over, the success of phishing campaigns raises significantly at that point in time. So education needs to be ongoing and persistent, plain spoken, truthful, and in your face.
Repeated is really important. I think the other thing is, how do you keep it fresh? Because I think that's the other thing I see is that every time I send a transfer with my bank, and I'm in my app transferring money on a pretty regular basis, I'll see a little thing down the bottom that might say, this could be a scam, tick here to prove that this could be a scam, or etc. If it's the same warning every single time, the third time you've read it, you don't read it, you just tick the box because it's, do you accept the terms and conditions? Yes, that's your doing. I think part of what this comes down to, and this is where systems, banks, institutions, and an education process can come together and start to say, okay, how do we provide a warning that's much more personalized and much more relevant to what you happen to be doing, rather than every time, if I send a transfer for $25 or if I send a transfer for $25,000, the messaging and the process should be different. If I send a domestic transfer to somebody I've already transferred before versus an international transfer to an account I've never seen, I should be getting a different kind of conversation come through. It shouldn't just be boilerplate. And I think that's what you're saying as well.
It needs to be an active engagement, not a passive engagement. Not that thing where you just click the box to get through. It has to be something that's active, that causes that mental acuity to kick in.
I mean, look, and we have the mechanisms these days to check, okay, is this actually an active account on a crypto exchange, or is it a genuine bank account? I want to know the difference between those two things, because if I'm wiring money to somebody and it's, actually it's going to their crypto account, it's like, why is this going to a crypto account, right? So I think it's that level of sophistication we can improve to give the consumer a better chance of engaging with the message, because it's hard being a consumer. There's a lot going on. We're all busy. We don't want to read thousands of messages. We rolled out GDPR in Europe a few years ago. Every single website I go to has a tick box now to say, will I accept the cookies? How many of those do I read? I could sign away my rights to anything in that box because I don't read it anymore, and none of us do, right? We just, okay, next. And these new wave of tools, things like ChatGPT and generative AI, they have a lot of value in that space because they can start to interpret and make decisions about, okay, how should we frame this? How do we make this more human, a more human engagement rather than just a tick yes or no to sign away your rights? It shouldn't be like that. It's like, did you know this? Or looking at this, it seems that you're trying to do this. Look, I don't want the Windows paperclip to come back because that's not what I'm interested in. But
right.
There's got to be something. The technology can be a force for good in this space to make that human interaction a lot more meaningful.
That ChatGPT type bot takes away a lot of the lifting that a human being would have to do to engage with that customer to determine whether that customer was being scammed or not. And it would take away a lot of that lifting right there. And it's not difficult to implement those types of programs. And the safety that would transfer onto your customers cannot be overstated at that point.
You can see that kind of stuff. It can be a force for good. There's a lot of this good stuff in technology. And I think we often get bogged down in these conversations and go, oh, wow, the technology is getting so good. The fraudsters have got access to this stuff. It's going to make our lives really difficult as an industry, or as, people trying to stop this stuff. But at the same time we have those things. We have access to those things. And when we use them well, it's a cat and mouse game, but we can get ahead. We shouldn't always think we're playing catch up. There are ways to get ahead. Look, Brett, it's been fabulous to chat. It's been really good fun.
No, hey, absolutely. If you don't mind, perhaps you can come on my show sometime. We could just shoot the chat for a bit.
I would love that. That would be a lot of fun. Thank you, man. I really appreciate it.
All right. Take care.